Why the country with the most gold is not the richest one. There is a building in Kentucky that almost nobody has ever entered. It sits behind fences layered with razor wire, monitored by armed guards around the clock, protected by a door that weighs more than most cars. The airspace above it is restricted. The Army base next door is not a coincidence. Fort Knox holds approximately 4,580 metric tons of gold. At today's market prices, that is somewhere in the range of $400 billion. The largest single national gold reserve on the planet. No other country comes close in one location. And here is the thing nobody tells you in school. That gold does nothing. It doesn't back the dollar. It doesn't guarantee your savings account. It doesn't influence what the Federal Reserve decides on a Tuesday afternoon in Washington. It sits in a vault in Kentucky in the dark, and the American economy runs completely without it. So the question writes itself. If the United States holds more gold than any other country, and that gold is economically inert, then what actually makes the United States the wealthiest nation in recorded history? The answer is not what most people expect. And to find it, you have to understand what gold used to mean, and the exact moment it stopped. For most of human history, the logic was simple. Gold was money because gold was scarce. You couldn't print it. You couldn't manufacture it. You had to dig it out of the ground and count it. That scarcity made it trustworthy. Think of it like a coat check at an expensive restaurant. You hand over your coat. You receive a ticket. The ticket is worthless on its own. Just a small piece of paper, but it represents something real sitting in the back room. As long as you trust the restaurant isn't going to lose your coat. The system works. For decades, that was the dollar. Every bill in circulation was, in theory, a ticket. Behind it sat gold. Real, physical, countable gold. The system had a name, Bretton Woods. Born in 1944, in a hotel conference room in New Hampshire, where representatives from 44 allied nations agreed to reorganize the global economy around a single anchor. The US dollar, fixed to gold at $35 per ounce. One metal, one currency, one price, 44 countries. It worked. Until it didn't. By the late 1960s, the coat check was in trouble. The United States had been spending heavily on Vietnam, on domestic programs, on the infrastructure of global military presence. More dollars were flowing into the world than the gold supply could reasonably support. Foreign governments began to notice, and they started doing something the system technically allowed but nobody expected anyone to actually do. They started turning in their tickets. France sent ships to New York to physically collect gold in exchange for dollars. Charles de Gaulle called the dollar's privileged position an exorbitant privilege, a phrase economists still use today. The coat check was running low on coats. And in the summer of 1971, the United States faced a choice. That choice, and the Sunday night television address that delivered it, is where everything about modern money begins. August 15, 1971. A Sunday night. Most Americans were finishing dinner, thinking about the week ahead. The Vietnam War was still running. The economy was showing cracks. Inflation creeping up, unemployment rising, gold reserves draining quietly in the background like water from a bathtub nobody was watching. At 9 p.m., President Richard Nixon interrupted regular programming. He spoke for 18 minutes. By the time he finished, the financial architecture that had organized the global economy for 27 years was gone. Not weakened, not reformed, gone. His advisors had spent 72 hours designing the announcement at Camp David. Most U.S. allies received no warning. The French finance minister reportedly heard about it watching television. Like everyone else, the core of the announcement was simple. The United States would no longer convert dollars to gold. The coat check was closed, permanently, and the coats were staying. To understand why this was shocking, hold two things in mind at once. First, every country that had organized its currency around the dollar had done so on the explicit promise that dollars could become gold. Remove that promise, and every currency sitting on top of it suddenly floats in open air. Second, Nixon didn't ask. He announced. No international negotiation. No multilateral agreement. One Sunday night address. and the global monetary system changed its operating principles before Monday morning. There is a word economists use for what happened next. Fiat, from the Latin, let it be done. Money that exists because a government says it exists, and for no other reason. Every major currency in the world today is fiat currency. The dollar, the euro, the yen, the pound. None backed by gold, silver, or any physical commodity. Backed by something else. Something harder to put in a vault. We'll get to that. When Nixon closed the gold window, the conventional prediction was disorder. If money isn't backed by anything real, why would anyone accept it? Why would Japan sell electronics for dollars? Why would Saudi Arabia price oil in a currency untethered from any physical anchor? The dollar should have weakened. Confidence should have eroded. Instead, the opposite happened. The dollar got stronger. Not without turbulence. The 1970s were genuinely difficult, with inflation reaching nearly 15% by 1980. But the dollar did not collapse. It did not lose its status. Within a decade, it had reasserted itself as the undisputed center of global finance. And it has held that position ever since. Which raises the real question, the one hiding underneath all the gold and all the history. If the dollar isn't backed by gold, what is it backed by? Part of the answer arrived 2 years after Nixon's announcement. The Arab oil embargo. Energy prices soaring. The United States, facing this new reality, negotiated a deal with Saudi Arabia. The terms were not complicated. Saudi Arabia would price its oil exclusively in US dollars. In return, the United States would provide military protection and a guaranteed market. Other OPEC nations followed. Overnight, the dollar acquired a new anchor. Not gold, oil. Every country that needed to buy oil, which was every country, now needed dollars to do it. The demand for the currency became structural, automatic, built into the physical requirements of running a modern economy. You need energy to run a country. Energy costs dollars. Therefore, you need dollars. More durable than gold had ever been. Gold is inert. Oil moves. Oil matters in ways that are immediate and impossible to ignore. But there was a second mechanism. One that operated more quietly than oil markets. One that involved a financial instrument most people have heard of but few have truly examined. The United States Treasury bond. And this is where the story stops being about history and starts being about right now. Picture the world's most boring investment. Piece of paper, issued by a government. It pays you a fixed amount of interest over a fixed number of years. At the end, you get your money back. No drama. No volatility. No story. That is a treasury bond. And right now, foreign governments, central banks, and sovereign wealth funds are holding approximately $8 trillion worth of them. China holds over $700 billion. Japan holds over $1 trillion. Even countries with complicated relationships with Washington, countries that have publicly questioned American dominance, hold American debt. Quietly, consistently, year after year. Ask yourself why. Here is the mechanism. And once you see it everywhere. Every country that runs a trade surplus, selling more to the world than it buys, accumulates foreign currency, particularly dollars, because most global trade is invoiced in dollars. Those dollars pile up in central bank reserves. Now the question becomes, what do you do with them? Convert them to your own currency, and you push your exchange rate up, making your exports more expensive, undercutting the very advantage that generated the surplus. Hold them as cash and they earn nothing. Or, you buy treasury bonds. Park your surplus dollars in an asset that is liquid, stable, and backed by the largest economy in history. Earn a modest return. Keep your exchange rate competitive. And know that whenever you need those dollars back, the market for US treasuries is so deep you can sell within minutes. It is not charity. It is rational self-interest operating at national scale. The result, the United States borrows money from the world. And the world is glad to lend it. Read that sentence again. This is what the economist Barry Eichengreen meant when he updated de Gaulle's old phrase. The dollar's position is an exorbitant privilege, because it allows the United States to do something no other country can do without consequence. spend more than it earns. Indefinitely, when a household spends more than it earns, it faces a reckoning. When a small country runs persistent deficits, bond markets get nervous, interest rates rise, the currency weakens. The discipline is swift and painful. When the United States runs a deficit, the world buys more Treasury bonds. The mechanism that should create pressure instead creates demand. But here is where the story adds its final layer. The part that moves it from interesting to genuinely strange. The United States is not just the world's largest debtor. It is simultaneously the issuer of the world's reserve currency and the operator of the financial infrastructure that almost every other country depends on daily. SWIFT, the international payment system moving trillions between banks every day, operating in dollars under rules Washington can influence. The IMF, the World Bank, both born at Bretton Woods, both operating with the dollar as their baseline unit of account. Correspondent banking, the system by which a bank in Lagos or Sao Paulo processes an international transaction, almost always passing through a US bank somewhere in the chain. These are not conspiracies. They are infrastructure, built over decades, layer by layer, the way a city builds sewage systems and electrical grids, not as expressions of power, but as solutions to practical problems. The power came later, as a consequence. And here is the paradox sitting at the center of all of it. The countries most motivated to displace the dollar face a structural problem. To replace it, you need a currency the world trusts enough to hold in reserve. To earn that trust, you need deep, open, liquid financial markets. To have those markets, you need the legal transparency, capital mobility, and institutional credibility that takes generations to build. You cannot shortcut it. You cannot decree it. The dollar's dominance is not maintained by American virtue. It is maintained by the absence of a workable alternative. Which brings us back to Fort Knox. That gold is still there, 4,580 metric tons, sitting in the dark. And the strange truth is this: the gold no longer makes the dollar strong, but the dollar makes the gold relevant. Because gold is priced in dollars. Because commodity markets run on dollars. Because the unit of account for the world's most traded asset is the currency of a country that technically abandoned gold more than 50 years ago. The thing that was supposed to back the currency now derives its value from the currency. That is not a crisis. That is not a scandal. It is just the world as it actually works, once you know where to look. And there is one final piece. The question of what happens when the system strains. When the arithmetic gets uncomfortable. When other countries start asking not whether to hold dollars but how many. That is where we are right now. There is a question that central bankers do not answer in press conferences. Not because they don't know the answer, because the answer is uncomfortable in the specific way that true things sometimes are. Not alarming, not secret, just quietly unsettling once you sit with it long enough. What exactly backs the dollar today? Not gold. We established that. Not oil entirely. The petrodollar arrangement has frayed at the edges as more bilateral trade deals price commodities in other currencies. Not the sheer size of the American economy alone, because size without institutional trust is just mass. The honest answer is belief. Structured, rational, self-reinforcing belief. The kind that becomes real precisely because enough people act as though it is. Economists have a term for this: network effects. You use a particular messaging app not because it is technically superior, but because the people you need to reach are already on it. The value grows with every additional participant. Leaving becomes costly not because the app is irreplaceable, but because leaving means leaving everyone else behind. The dollar works the same way. A Brazilian exporter invoices in dollars because their buyers expect dollars. Their buyers use dollars because commodity markets run on dollars. Commodity markets run on dollars because producers price in dollars. Producers price in dollars because that is what buyers hold in reserve. The circle is closed, self-referential, and remarkably stable, not because any single actor chose it, but because no single actor can afford to leave it alone. This is what backs the dollar. Not a vault, a network, but networks can shift. Slowly, at the edges first. In 2023, Brazil and China settled a significant bilateral trade transaction directly in yuan and reais, bypassing the dollar entirely. Saudi Arabia opened discussions about pricing some oil sales in yuan. India began settling trade with Russia in rupees following sanctions that froze Russian dollar reserves after the invasion of Ukraine. These are not dollar replacements. Not yet, possibly not ever at the scale required. Think of it less like a revolution and more like a river changing course. Incrementally, the main channel stays where it is, but small tributaries start finding new paths around rocks that weren't there before. The rocks, in this case, are sanctions, asset freezes, the demonstrated willingness of the United States to use dollar infrastructure as a geopolitical instrument. When Russia's foreign reserves were frozen in 2022, every central bank on Earth watched. And some of them quietly asked a question they had not seriously entertained before. What if that happened to us? Diversification followed. Gold purchases by central banks reached their highest levels in decades. Not because gold does anything useful in a modern economy, but because gold cannot be frozen, cannot be sanctioned, cannot be rerouted through a correspondent bank that receives a phone call from Washington. Gold still does one thing the dollar cannot. It exists outside the network. And so we arrive at the strange symmetry at the heart of this story. The United States abandoned gold because it needed freedom, freedom to spend, to run deficits, to project power without the constraint of a fixed metal anchor. That freedom built the most dominant financial system in history, but using that system as a weapon has sent the world quietly back toward the thing that was abandoned. Not to restore gold as a monetary standard. That world is gone. But to hold gold as insurance against a system whose rules, it turns out, can change on a Sunday night with 18 minutes of television and no prior warning. Fort Knox suddenly looks a little different. Here is where we land. The richest country in the world is not rich because of its gold. It is rich because of a sequence of historical accidents, deliberate decisions, and self-reinforcing systems that accumulated over 80 years into something with no real precedent. A currency the world needs, not because of law, not because of gold, because rebuilding the entire infrastructure of global trade around something new is more expensive than simply continuing to use what already works. That is the dollar's true reserve, not the metal in Kentucky, the inertia of a system too large and too interconnected to replace quickly. Which means the real question, the one worth carrying out of this video, is not will the dollar collapse. That is the wrong question. The right question is quieter, more interesting. What does it mean to live inside an economy whose foundation is not a thing, but an agreement? The answer applies to more than just the dollar. It applies to every price you've ever paid, every salary deposited, every mortgage signed. Modern money is a shared story, told consistently enough by enough people that it functions like bedrock. The gold in Fort Knox isn't what makes it real. You are